Um, so this is our presentation on open primary elections. So first we're going to talk about Maryland's current primary system. So currently in Maryland, it is one of only 17 states in America that has a closed primary system, or in Maryland's case, it's a partially closed primary system, meaning that Maryland parties are able to choose whether or not their primaries will be open to independent voters. However, in the past years, there's only been one instance where parties have opened up their primaries to independent voters, and that was the Republican Party, which permitted unaffiliated voters to cast ballots in the presidential primaries, and that took place in 2000. However, that change was a short-lived one, as a year after they decided to close the primaries again. So here's some reasons why people would want an open primary system in Maryland. Maryland's current primary system is now gaining high amounts of opposition, with a lawsuit being filed the week of May 30th, 2025, by 5 unaffiliated voters. This lawsuit declared that the restrictions on primary systems to be a violation to the state constitution. The argument for a Maryland open primary system is backed by our very own Constitution, as under Amendment 14, which gives all citizens the right to vote, which cannot be restricted by state, or Amendment 15, that prohibits restriction on voting by age or any other reason, and Amendment 26, which gives the right to vote to all U.S. citizens 18 or older. So that's meaning that Maryland, by restricting unaffiliated voters from voting, could be seen as a violation to our Constitution, and that was seen in the lawsuit that was filed. People have argued that because primary elections is funded by every single taxpayer of Maryland voters, and 1/4 of these voters, however, aren't permitted to vote, but are still required to pay taxes, can be seen as unconstitutional and unjust at the same time. Additionally, Maryland's closed primary system is one to especially discriminate against young voters, as a greater portion of unaffiliated voters are young voters who are still trying to figure out on their political beliefs and are more inclined to vote unaffiliated or be independent voters, as they're not as aware of what they politically believe in. However, this system directly affects them and discriminates them.
So next is some pros and cons. So for the pros, according to the Bipartisan Policy Center, in 2022, states with open primaries experienced a higher voter turnout than states that had a closed primary. And states that adopt nonpartisan primaries see a 6.1 percentage point increase in primary election turnout. And all racial demographics had a higher voter turnout in more open systems. However, the increase in participation is larger among some communities of color, decreasing the turnout gap between white voters and voters of color. And then additionally, young voters are more likely to be independent than older voters, so this is leaving out a big percentage of people. And then for the
I couldn't hear you. So is that my problem?
No, I also can't hear you, Emmeline.
Oh,
No, it's good. We can hear you back.
you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the cons, open primaries can potentially lead to party raiding, where voters from one political party vote in another party's primary and attempt to vote in the weaker candidate. However, this is extremely rare. For example, in Wisconsin, surveys from the 2016 and 2018 primaries showed that 2% of Democrats plan to vote in the Republican primary and 2% of Republicans plan to vote in the Democratic primary. So there is a chance that these crossover votes were in good faith, and that even if they were an attempt at sabotage, the percentages canceled each other out. Furthermore, even in the circumstance of a closed primary, there is no way to fully ensure that crossover voting or sabotage doesn't happen. For example, a person who aligns with the Republican Party could change their party registration to Democratic, so they would still be able to vote in the Democratic primary.
All right, so now I'd like to talk about how open primaries function in other states. So first off, we've got Alaska. So Alaska's transition to a top four non-party partisan primary system in 2022 produced notable results for candidate diversity. Women were also far more likely to seek office under the new system, as more women ran for statewide offices in 2022 than in the five previous election cycles combined. And so Alaska, along with California, reported an average increase in voter turnout of 3 percentage points. And so so before we talk about what we plan on implementing for Maryland, I'd like to go over the different types of open primary systems. So, of course, there's our current closed primary system in which people from different parties can't vote for the other. But for open primaries with partisan registration, it means that voters have to record a party affiliation, even though this affiliation doesn't necessarily restrict their ability to vote in the primary election of a different party that they choose. While open primaries with nonpartisan registration is a system where voters can participate regardless of their party registration. So, how this works for independents is that in the case of an open primary with a partisan registration, they just wouldn't be able to vote for either Democrat or the Democrats or the Republicans open primaries. Or I'm sorry, I mean the candidate selection, but for the open primaries with nonpartisan registration, that independents can vote in that scenario. All right, and I guess I'll be going over the potential ways to execute an open primary system in Maryland. So, as I said earlier, voters who are registered as Democratic or Republican can only vote in their respective primary party's primary. So, for Maryland, we believe that it would be best if we believe that it would be best if independent or unaffiliated voters can choose which party's primary to vote in. So, and some other options that we can walk through is that open primary system with the partisan registration where unaffiliated voters have to declare a party affiliation for that election specifically. However, they are able to have a chance of which primary to vote for by using AI to for voting regulate by using AI systems for voting regulations that analyze voting data. And finally, there are individual candidate-based systems where everybody just receives the same ballot that lists all party candidates with their affiliation. So so it'd be a very participatory system in which voters can then just vote for their preferred candidates regardless of affiliation.
And here we have the Maryland's public opinion on primary systems. So, Open Primaries is an organization that advocates specifically for open primary elections and specifically targets states like Maryland that have closed primaries. And they have emphasized that closed primaries hamper our democracy. They exclude independent voters, the largest and fastest growing sector of the electorate. And additionally, other organizations in Maryland that support this cause is the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, and Let Us Vote MD. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thank you for the team, Roslyn, Emily, and Emily. And it's a great job. So I want to say you put everything together, actually have very complete overview of the issue we're facing. I look at the semi-closed or totally semi-open or open. It's kind of probably semi-open is the one easier to be accepted by the major parties. I think, especially I think about the way we can increase young voter participation dramatically. That will be definitely a great point to emphasize on that. And a great job. Thank you very much for this team.